Hi, and welcome back to Focal Point AFR Talk. Brian Fisher is my name. The program is Focal Point, the home of muscular Christianity on conservative talk radio. And we're going to jump into the Syria business. By the way, we're going to talk Obamacare at the bottom of this hour with Amy Kramer, who is the chairman of the Tea Party Express, or chairwoman of the Tea Party Express. I go for the generic terminology myself, so I'm going to refer to her as the chairman of the Tea Party Express. We had a congressman in Idaho, by the way, Helen Chenoweth, very staunch conservative, and she just wanted people to address her as congressman because it's generic. It's a generic use. It's not a sexist term. It's a generic use. So she insisted on being known as Congressman Helen Chenoweth. Anyway, Amy Kramer will be with us at the bottom of this hour from the Tea Party Express to talk about the Don't Fund Obamacare effort and where it's at. Some good news on that front, by the way. The Don't Fund Obamacare petition site is now over 1 million signatures. 1 million of us have signed the petition to defund Obamacare, so that is coming up at the bottom of the hour. Now, one of the issues that has come up frequently when I talk or write about Hitler, talk about Nazi Germany, a lot of people will say that Hitler was a Christian. He was an example of a right-wing Christian. Nazism was Christian in its orientation. And I have repeatedly said, no, nothing could be further from the truth, that Hitler was willing to use Christian terminology as long as it suited his purposes to do so. But Hitler himself was very steeped in the occult. In fact, by the time we got toward the end of World War II, he had created an entirely new calendar for the German people, a calendar which removed every Christian holiday. There was not a single Christian holiday on the German calendar. They had all been replaced with pagan parallels, pagan alternatives, pagan counterfeits. So every holiday on the German calendar was now a pagan holiday, no longer a Christian holiday whatsoever. So he was systematically making the same effort that the ACLU and secular fundamentalists are doing today to remove all mentions and all trace of Christ, Christianity, and the cross from public life. In fact, he produced Christmas tree ornaments that were alternatives to Christian ornaments. You know, people will put little creches on their trees, or they'll have little stars, or they'll have ornaments that may have a cross on them. He replaced all of those with ornaments that had swastikas on them. So he was okay for them to have Christmas trees, but he wanted to be sure they were decorated with Nazi symbols. Now, one of the reasons this is significant is I believe that there are some serious pathologies associated with homosexual behavior, with the homosexual lifestyle. And I've talked about this before with regard to Nazi Germany. We know that the Nazi Party started in a gay bar in Munich. We know, as a matter of historical record, that most of the SS, the stormtroopers that surrounded Hitler and were his enforcers, we know that they were homosexuals, and we know it's because he couldn't get straights to be vicious enough in being his enforcers. Now, when you see the homosexual lobby in action, and please don't misunderstand me, I'm not saying they're going around beating people up like this. I'm not saying that. I'm not saying that they are physical thugs and enforcers in the same way that Hitler's stormtroopers were. But everywhere you go, when gay activists gain the upper hand, they are thuggish, totalitarian, and repressive. They're simply not content with a live and let live philosophy. Their agenda, just as the stormtroopers for Hitler, the homosexual stormtroopers for Hitler, were to exterminate and eliminate the opposition and beat them into silence. That's what homosexual activists want to do today, not physically, but through intimidation and legal action and harassment to do the same thing to Christians today. They're not content to live and let live. They've got to obliterate. They've got to punish. They've got to destroy. They've got to eliminate. They've got to marginalize. They've got to neutralize. They have to completely silence any voice that defends man-woman marriage and the abiding truths of the Word of God. Now, I've got one quick soundbite about Hitler's spirituality I want to play. It's clip number 9. This is Dinesh D'Souza, and this was from a debate in which he was engaged that had to do with Hitler. and had to do with the false accusation that Hitler was a right-wing Christian. You'll hear the same thing, by the way, with Timothy McVeigh, the Oklahoma City bomber. A lot of people say, well, there's your Tea Party guy. There's your right-wing Christian fanatic. He was not a Christian. He was an atheist. In fact, he said, science is my religion. That's what he said before he blew up the federal building in Oklahoma City. When he was in prison, he met Christ. But prior to that, he was an atheist or an agnostic at best. So don't let anybody tell you that Timothy McVeigh was some kind of right-wing Tea Party Christian patriot. He absolutely was not. He was an atheist. He did what he did in the name of science, not in the name of Christ or Christianity. So anyway, Dinesh D'Souza is in this conversation or in this debate, and the subject of Hitler's affiliation with Christianity came up, and here is what Dinesh D'Souza said in response, and everything he says in this clip is exactly right.
I want to focus on the Holocaust. I would recommend to you this book, Hitler's Table Talk. It's edited by the prominent historian Hugh Trevor Roper, and it constitutes direct notes of Hitler's comments authorized by Bormann between 1941 and 1945. In the early 1930s, when Hitler was coming to power, he wanted to win over the Bavarian Catholics and the Lutherans in Germany. And so he invented what he called a Nazi Christ. Not a Christ who was killed, but a Jew killer. And he tried to sell that to the churches, which didn't go for it. This book records page after page of Hitler's loathing and hatred for Christianity. He regarded the church as the most dangerous opposition to the Nazi regime. And I could read for an hour quotations from Hitler's mouth about his hatred for Christianity. My point is, what the atheists will put up on their websites are quotations from the early 1930s. Mein Kampf, where Hitler says, "I'm doing the Lord's work." This was part of a propaganda campaign to win over the churches that was unsuccessful. Hitler was a hater of Christianity.
So Hitler was a hater of Christianity. So Dinesh D'Souza is exactly right. He hated the church. He regarded the church as the primary threat to his totalitarian agenda for Germany, just as the church today, you and I, ladies and gentlemen, you know the reason the left hates us? They hate us because we are a threat to their totalitarian ambitions to take over the United States of America and to expunge Christ and Christianity and the cross from public life. Everywhere you see the secular fundamentalists in action, that's what they're about. They are trying to eliminate any public place for the name of Christ, even the name of God. Got a story here where atheists now are going to court, and the Supreme Court in the state of Massachusetts is going to hear their case this week, where atheists are trying to get the court, the Supreme Court. This is the same court that gave us sodomy-based marriage. We wouldn't have sodomy-based marriage in America if it were not for the Massachusetts Supreme Court. So they've already shown how far out into the weeds they are willing to go, how far they are willing to stray from the founding principles of this country. And now they're getting ready to possibly issue a ruling that would remove God, forcibly remove God from public schools. So you got a Supreme Court forcibly pushing sodomy into public schools, and at the same time on the cusp of forcibly taking God out of public schools. And atheists are the ones that are pressing this case to have the pledge made illegal, to have it removed so that it cannot be pronounced. It can't be verbalized in any kind of school setting. And realize atheists, no atheist is compelled to recite the Pledge of Allegiance. They're perfectly free not to say it. If it offends them in some way, they're perfectly free not to say it. But they're arguing because it offends us to hear the words "under God," then we have a right not to have to listen, not to have anybody in our neighborhood, anybody in our zip code, anybody in our area code even say the Pledge of Allegiance. And their basis is that it offends us. Now, I want to tell you, ladies and gentlemen, you can read the Constitution from the first word to the last word. You can read it upside down. You can read it from right to left. You can read it backwards. You can read it forwards. You will not find anywhere in there where being offended is a basis for legal action. It does not exist. Nobody has a constitutional right not to be offended. Now, if you had a constitutional right, then we would have the right to say, hey, it offends me that we're not reciting the Pledge of Allegiance. I find that offensive. That offends me. You got to put it back in there because I'm offended. It's obviously absurd. A lot of people are going to be offended by virtually everything that happens. It's simply not a constitutional basis for action. So we will see what happens in Massachusetts. But I've got two stories here that kind of illustrates this kind of thuggish nature of the homosexual movement. Liz Cheney is running for the Senate in Wyoming. And she came out and said that she is not a supporter of same-sex marriage. Now, her sister Mary is a lesbian, and she is in a lesbian marriage. And she came out with a very harshly critical Facebook post about her own sister. She went to Facebook to publicly, before the eyes of the entire nation, criticize and land on her sister, doing all but accusing her of being a homophobic bigot. Now, here's my point. Here is somebody who claims to be a paragon of tolerance and diversity. She has no room for tolerance in her own family. She has no room for diversity in her own family. If she was really about tolerance and really about diversity, she would be saying, look, this is wonderful. My own family we're demonstrating tolerance in our own family. I'm fine with my sister. She is entitled to have her own opinion about homosexual marriage. I love her. She's entitled to it. I will defend to the death her right to disagree with me. That is tolerance. But there's no room for that in Mary Cheney's world. Her sister instead is a homophobic bigot. And we brought you this story earlier about this bakery in Oregon that politely refused to bake a cake for a lesbian wedding. And a complaint was registered with the labor commissioner in the state of Oregon, who said these people need to be rehabilitated. Now we find out that they have been driven completely out of business. They had to close their doors last week. We're filming a documentary here on vanishing religious liberty in America, and our team was there the day that they closed the door to their bakery late last week for the last time. The guy's now driving a garbage truck because he has been driven out of business by these pathologically vicious homosexual activists. Death threats, harassment. A lot of their vendors won't do business with them anymore. They have literally been driven out of business by the pathologically vicious homosexual movement. It is not, ladies and gentlemen, benign alternative to heterosexuality. Back in 2.